Good morning, everyone, and welcome to a very special interview with author Aaron Phillip Clarke. We are BookBase, a company that started with a mission to bring people together through reading, and led to the creation of an app that allows users to review and display books that they've read, as well as work with authors to discuss important themes in the novels they write. Before we get started, I do want to give thanks to some people. First, I want to thank Aaron and his team for not only giving us the chance to collaborate with him, but also helping us put this event together. I want to also thank Solomon for hosting us for this interview today, allowing us to do our first ever interview with an author in front of a live audience at Hop Cafe. Next, I want to thank my team for helping me make this happen on our side, including my co-founder Elias, that's manning the cameras with our great friend Lance, our third co-founder Jalen, who wasn't able to make it today but is definitely here in spirit, and our artist Holly Reynolds, who has an art account at Holly Hiromi Art on Instagram, and was able to start us off by allowing me to gift you this amazing piece of art that was influenced by Aaron's latest novel, The Bluest Night.
Oh. Very cool, very cool.
All right. That's all yours. Yeah.
Oh, that's mine.
Yeah, that's yours.
Thank you.
Keep
Okay. Thank you so much.
Of course. Continuing, Aaron specializes in writing crime fiction novels that explores themes of race, identity, and redemption. He's received not only amazing accolades like being a USA Today bestselling writer, but great opportunities to collaborate with celebrities and activists. If you're interested in following Aaron's journey, please check out his website at www.aaronphillipclarke.com, his Facebook, Aaron Phillip Clarke, and his Instagram at RealAPCBooks. And as always, if you enjoy these book-based interviews, please check us out on Instagram, Facebook, Blue Sky, and YouTube. Aaron, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me. This is great.
Of course. Just getting started with this interview, how are you feeling today?
I'm feeling good. How are you feeling today?
Absolutely nervous. This is a great event, and again, I'm thankful for everybody that's here. But I think, of course, going on this journey of being an entrepreneur and being a part of BookBase, it's really interesting to see how we started around a year ago with launching an app, and the process of that was difficult, so we decided to pivot towards working with authors. And it started with me being scared on a Zoom interview, shaking. Thank God the camera was above my neck, but I was just completely scared. And going from that to where we are today, it's amazing. So I'm really excited to be a part of this event. And leading on to our first question, in a trailer you created for this event, you talk about how while you've participated in multiple book events, you mentioned how you wanted to look for alternatives from events that had fees, wanting to search for opportunities that were more inclusive and accessible. What do these events like these mean to you, and why put in the extra effort to make them accessible?
Yeah, so it means a great deal. So, I've been writing since, I'll date myself, but my first book came out 2010. Mm-hmm. And I was able to participate in numerous events, but I always felt like when they're at a bookstore, or even if I'm doing it at a college campus or something like that, it's not always accessible for a lot of people. Some people hear bookstore and feel like that may not be a space that's welcoming to them. And so for me, I think it's always more engaging when people can come together in a space like this. And on top of that, there's food, which I encourage everybody to get. So it's 10% off. So, please have the popcorn chicken, the coffee. But the idea is that it creates community. People like to come together in spaces that are comfortable, that are inviting. And there's no reason to charge for that. So talking about books should be free for everybody. There should never be a charge to talk about writing, talk about books, talk about craft. So that's something I feel very strongly about. And I think that I've been in situations too where, there's been some kind of cover charge or something like that. And I think that while obviously bookstores need that, especially independent bookstores, I always think that there has to be another way to get more people in the door and want to come in, and not necessarily, if they're charging a fee that normally will prohibit that. So I think, the idea is that it's community. Right. And we should never charge to create community.
No, absolutely. Before I continue talking about that point, the popcorn chicken is actually amazing. Like, I definitely binged a little bit before we started this, so please definitely check that out. But I totally agree with you. I think when it comes to creating a community and wanting to, have events where there's a lot of inclusion, I think the price tag is never necessary because the right to learn, the right to discuss things, especially when it comes to literature, to learn something new and to meet with other people to share that. I think in a time where everybody's kind of, into technology and a little bit isolated because of that factor, I think events like this kind of reminds us the humanity of coming together, whether it's about literature or wanting to go to a cafe just to try something new. So no, I totally agree with you, and I'm really happy that we were able to make this accessible for everyone here today. Moving on to our next question, your recent novel, The Bluest Night, is the third entry in the Trevor Finnegan series and takes the protagonist on a journey that includes characters from past entries as well as introducing new ones. How did you get the concept for this novel, and what was it like weaving it all together?
Well, let's see, I'll start with the concept. So, the end of Blue Like Me, which is the second book, I ended on a cliffhanger. So I wasn't sure that I was gonna write another one, but I kind of thought, well, here's a little bit of a genesis of an idea. And I said, I'll end it kind of on this cliffhanger, so when I pick it up again, I kind of will know where I was going with it. And so at the end of that book, a woman walks into Trevor's father's apartment and basically tells Trevor, this is where he learns that he has the brother he never knew about. And that not only does he learn he has a brother, but he also learns that now this brother is missing. And that's kind of all I had. And then through my research and just kind of spending time trying to think about where the story would potentially go, I was always struck by, I pull a lot from real life cases. And so I was struck by the Matrice Richardson case, the woman who went missing in 2009 in the Malibu area and then unfortunately was later found unalived. But I was really struck by that case, and it got me thinking about homogenous communities and how they're often under-policed, and how anything can happen in these communities and it doesn't always get reported. And so I really started looking into Malibu and different missing person cases. And so that's really what launched this particular story. But I would say for each book is inspired by real life events.
When you're creating stories like this, I think, starting off by going off of real life events, I think that definitely serves as a really good compass to know where the pacing of the story will take you. How do you know when to wrap in details from previous novels into like a third entry, for example? There's a lot of characters that we learn about in this story. As someone that entered the series reading The Bluest Night for the first time, I didn't have any context for the other characters that were in Trevor's past, but there's definitely a focus on these characters when they come back to serve as either allies or other obstacles that affect Trevor's journey in his story. How do you know when to create new material and when to properly bring in characters from the past where you don't feel like at the same time you're kind of reminiscing over too much of the past, if that makes sense?
Yeah, so it does make sense. So I try not to rehash. I try not to give big chunks of exposition that basically are reminding people of the last few books, because I don't feel like it's always necessary. I think it's more about the relationships of the characters and not so much what they've been through, but you can tell from dialogue, from interaction, the sort of relationship that they have. And so, for example, Cassandra Boyle, she appeared in the second book. That's really where she was introduced. And I knew that her character arc would play through in this last book. And the dynamic between she and Trevor, you don't even have to read the second book to know that they have a very interesting relationship, in the sense that she's not a good person, but Trevor doesn't have any friends, and she's the closest thing to a friend that he can get. And his father they're working on that relationship, but it's fractured and it's slowly starting to mend. And without even reading the first book, you can get a sense of that simply by their interaction. And how in some ways he's embarrassed by his father and the things that his father says, and the way his father thinks is very, provincial. And yet he relies on him. And that comes across, on the page. And so I don't think too much about feeling like, okay, I have to drop this nugget in there that rehashes or references something in the first two books, because my hope is that as people are reading, they'll get a sense of that relationship off the bat and don't necessarily need to know everything that happened previously.
Right, absolutely. And I think your novel does a great job at doing that. Like I said before, didn't have a lot of experience with crime novels in general, but reading The Bluest Night, there's some characters like Cassandra that come up, and I'm like, who is this lady? And you kind of get this idea that there is a history, but it's not really spoken that much into detail to where you feel like it's all like rehashing of like what happened before. It's kind of going in, it flows in a way where you get exactly what you need to get the context, and then you're moving on with what's needed in Trevor's case.
Yeah.
And I think that's pretty realistic because if you're a detective or if you're an investigator and you have a case you need to solve, of course you'll probably want to go back to some allies that you probably went to information for before. You probably want to talk to them again. But at the same time, you don't want to rehash too much because you're on a ticking time clock, right? Like there's something you got to do.
Right, and you don't ever want to feel like the story is taking, in terms of the momentum, it's slowing down simply to deliver information. Mm-hmm. It's okay to have those slower beats in the story because a lot of thrillers do this, but they're kind of 0 to 60, rather pretty fast, And so for me, I think to write a realistic story, you're going to have those moments where it's a little bit slower, a little bit quieter, more introspective for the characters, and then pick up again. And so it's a balancing act. Mm-hmm. And so, a lot of those natural pauses or the slowdown comes automatically, at least when I'm writing. It just feels like this is a good place maybe for Trevor to consider a past case or consider something that happened. And the thing, too, is that a lot of these past cases created trauma for him. And so, Trevor is a fractured character. In the first book, he's not a hero. He's becoming a hero over the course of what will ultimately be all 4 books, and culminating in the last book where he really emerges as a hero. But in the world that Trevor exists in, it's really hard to be a hero. Right. And so these books, essentially, that's a big theme, is showing the difficulty of sometimes doing the right thing, especially when you're working in a machine such as the LAPD, which is the first book, and then just later operating in society. He believes very strongly in justice. And unfortunately, justice is not equal for everybody. And he wants it desperately to be equal, but that's not always the case. And so in his quest to make it equal for people, he does things that maybe don't align morally or ethically with how he really wants to be, but he looks at it as doing something maybe negative for the greater good.
Right, no, that's a great point that you make, and it kind of segues into my next question. The investigator protagonist is a recurring trope in fiction, having authors put these characters on a scale between the unstoppable force to being a volatile product of their environment. A user on BookBase actually commented about this on the book club chat for this novel, bringing up how Trevor reacts to these situations that happen in The Bluest Night. What was your inspiration for creating Trevor, and can you recall any moments when you felt like Trevor's path was different from what you initially expected? Now, I know you kind of already talked about Trevor right now, but was there ever, number one, was it hard for you to create a character that was inherently flawed? Because I feel like when you're writing a novel, you want to idealize the characters in some form, right? You want to have fun writing them. But when you create characters that have flaws and have problems, it kind of takes away the imagination of things, and it creates a little bit of a sense of reality that you need to follow. He's not perfect, and like you were saying in the first book, he wasn't good. And this is this whole series is a search of wanting to be a good person. Was that hard for you to create a character like that? And were there ever moments when Trevor had to take a path that you initially didn't want him to take, but it just made more sense writing the story?
Well, I don't think it's difficult to create flawed characters for me, because I like to think of them as literary humans. So I try to move away from the notion of character. When I was building Trevor, and especially even for this book and the book that's coming, I oftentimes create diary entries for him and approach it as being in his POV and just putting it on the page. I might say, first diary entry is what he's thinking about that particular day, what may end up being part of his backstory as that story kicks off, or that novel kicks off. And I kind of start there, so it makes it feel as if he exists. And it's not so much of, okay, here's a character, sort of thing that they kind of teach in creative writing programs, right? You do a whole character breakdown. Where are they from? What do they look like? What's their age? All that. Well, I don't focus on that. I kind of think about it in terms of what is their philosophy? What is their worldview? What is their belief? What potentially has happened to them that now has caused trauma, which explains the reason they act the way they do. And so that's where I start. Mm-hmm. And so for Trevor, for some reason, I don't know why, it hasn't always been the case, but he was very easy to write. Yeah. So, which, I think that it's a testament to why I keep writing about him, but he's very easy to write. He does things that even frustrate me, but it comes from somewhere. So as I'm writing, it may not be what I, Aaron Clark, would do, but it would definitely be a choice that Trevor would make. Yeah. I mean, the fact that Trevor is in the house with Cassandra knowing that she's incredibly dangerous, but he weighs it where he thinks he can control situations, and he thinks that he really knows her, and that even though she could be threatening, she does not pose a threat to him. Mm-hmm. And so he inserts himself into this woman's mansion, because she's living in Malibu, and it gives him an opportunity to have like a home base while he's investigating this case. Right. But even his father, who has all kind of flaws, recognizes early on that maybe we shouldn't be here. But Trevor's like, no, it's fine. I don't really know what she does. She may be involved in narcotics selling. She may be doing these horrible things in the community. And I know she was investigated by his ex-partner in the second book, but he still rationalizes it. And I think that that's, if I were to say it was a flaw, that's one of Trevor's flaws, is that he believes he can control situations and he can anticipate things happening, and always kind of gets it's always a surprise to him when he finally does put the pieces together and realizes, oh, I was completely wrong about this. Right. And I think that that's what makes him human, is that he recognizes that he's going to make mistakes. And he makes a few of them in every book, and tries to kind of fix it, but that's what a human being would do. Right. And so I know sometimes I get reviews, or I'll read reviews, and people say, oh, I was so frustrated when Trevor did this and did that, and I was screaming at the page. And it's like, well, that's good, Yeah. Because he's a human. Right. And sometimes people will make us want to scream, you know?
While I wasn't the one that wrote that review, that was totally me. Because, there'd be parts of the book where I'm like, what are you doing? Like, get out of the house, live a normal life, drop everything. And then, he thinks he can still control the situation. Something happens, you're like, Trevor, what are we doing? So, I think, but it's interesting because as a reader, I think you have a different perspective on things, because you're seeing things through a narration perspective, where you're looking at it as if like you're an omniscient being that's looking down on what Trevor's doing, who is he interacting with. You can kind of get an idea of the foreshadowing that's taking place in the book. But of course, Trevor doesn't see it because he's the one that's in the conflict.
Right.
This perspective that you gained on writing characters this way, was that something that you started off writing already knowing with this skill set? Or was this a perspective that you gained through writing, where you started off writing and you're like, wait a minute, I kind of want to go deeper with my characters, I want to expand more on their flaws? Or was this something that just got you going with writing?
That's a good question. I think, I'm not sure where it comes from, but I'm always interested in the psychology of characters more so than, I don't know, action-driven plots or things like that. I mean, I think I'm solid with plotting simply because I started as a screenwriter. Right. And so when it comes to structure and plotting, it's not hard for me to do, which is why I think I spend more time thinking about the motivations of the characters and their psychology and where they come from and how they function in the world. Right. And so for Trevor, I understood him very early on. And I knew the type of character that he was. And so what became fun was putting him in situations where that had to be tested. So the idea that, these true character moments where, people will act a particular way, but depending on who they're around. It's posturing. Trevor was a cop, so it's posturing, it's command presence, all these things he was taught in the academy. But in those real moments where it comes down to it, you get to see who he really is.
Right.
And so that's important for me, because I think that that's the real character, that's the true character.
Right.
People say, you hear these stories about people who do really heroic acts, and they'll tell you, I don't know why I did that. I just acted, right? Mm-hmm. Adrenaline took over. I just did what I thought was the right thing to do. And I think that reflects who you really are. If you actually thought twice about it, you might say, hey, maybe I wouldn't, have acted that way or ran into a burning house. But that's who you really are in terms of your character. Right. You couldn't just stand there and watch that happen. And so for Trevor, that's a lot of it, of his behavior is rooted in that.
I definitely believe the saying that, actions speak louder than words. And I think for Trevor, that's very much the case. And I think while that does make him a flawed character in how he does things instinctually and not really thinking about the consequences, it also makes him inherently a better detective than the other people that he's seen on the force. Because there's a lot of dialogue where he talks about how other LAPD investigators or officers, they also react instinctually, but it's the other way. Like, they are very quick to dismiss something or to walk away. Trevor's instinct is to want to dive deeper into something. And while that does put him into more, conflicts and it gets him into trouble,
yeah,
I think that's a trait that it's kind of a double-edged sword, but for Trevor, it kind of works out because he's the one that truly tries to chase justice. And in this book, you definitely see how far he's willing to go. And I think it creates a strong baseline of who Trevor is as a person. So,
and it's common. I mean, detective fiction is really old. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's existed for a very long time. Right. So we're talking about like the late 1800s. So, this idea of investigation is not new, but I think I'm more interested in the nuances of the investigator. I'm more interested in the detective. If you were to remove the badge, if they're a cop, or you remove whatever credentials they have, and just have a person having to figure out a puzzle, that's more interesting to me. And I think that, there's a lot of people who write detective fiction. A lot of police procedurals and investigative, novels, but they don't always feel human to me.
Right.
They feel very much like characters. That because they're a series, they're going to make it to the end of the book, and that they're going to move on to the next book. And then sometimes what would always frustrate me is that after one book was done, let's say they had the craziest case ever. Mm-hmm. And then it never gets brought up again in the next book.
Right.
Maybe just in passing, but you never actually get a sense of the trauma that case left them with.
Yeah.
And it was very important for Trevor to carry that. In my book, Trevor has a therapist.
Right.
I don't know how common that is with other, detective fiction. I remember when I introduced the therapist in the second book, and my editor wanted me to take it out. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was so odd because they said, well, look what he just went through. He's got to talk to somebody. He doesn't want to bring that to his spouse,
right?
Because she wouldn't understand that. So, and his father at that time was alcoholic. So talking to him is not always positive.
Right.
So I said he has to have somebody, So that's why I had introduced that character. But I remember my editor was like, we could probably lose the last 5 pages. I said, why? What's the issue? And she said, I don't know about the therapist character. And I'm thinking that's so odd because, police deal with things.
Right,
and mental
absolutely.
health is a very big part of it. Yeah. And I'd much rather have Trevor go see a therapist than decide to take up drinking,
right?
Which is a trope we always see, right? Or take up, something really risky behavior. So that was a conscious effort for me to do that.
Yeah. No, I think that's funny because that's why I couldn't keep on watching Scooby-Doo. All these kids, they keep on solving crimes, no trauma.
Yeah.
They just go into haunted houses, they'll just go into all these My mom wouldn't even let me out at like 6 p.m. to go hang out with my friends. And you got a whole gang of these guys with the talking dog just going, going on adventures. No, they need therapists. Like, where are these guys? Where
And
are they getting
they
their
never
coaching?
talk about it.
Right.
It's no discussion. It's just case after case.
Yeah.
And that always feels like a character to me, because I think that they're not processing like a human. It's processing like a character. That was one of the issues I had too. I was a huge X-Files fan.
Mm-hmm.
But they saw some wild stuff,
Right.
every episode. But then the next episode was just the next wild, interesting thing.
Right.
Makes for great TV, but not always great if you want to follow a character's growth.
Right. No, absolutely. I think the way you write detective fiction is very interesting because of the multiple factors that you add into the story that I don't think is traditional for a detective fiction novel. One of them being the common theme of family popping up. What was the intention behind including this theme in a novel that centers itself around crime, which can be seen as the opposite of what family could represent? Because you think about crime, you think of chaos, you think of something that's wrong, which is inherently like, you would assume would be the opposite of family, which is union, togetherness. And you constantly see Trevor jumping between these two lives where it's either he's chasing for justice, which takes him down this spiral, or he has to kind of situate himself to be grounded for his family. Where was your reasoning for wanting to include family this much in this novel?
Because I think you always have to have a home to go to. Some form or fashion. It could be found family, it could be biological family. But it was very much inspired by Walter Mosley's Easy Rollins character. And Easy always has somebody to go home to, whether it's his best friend Mouse or his family, his adopted children, which are prevalent later in the book. So it was really inspired by that. And so I was able to tell Walter this, but the idea that it's hard enough just to exist in the world,
right?
Let alone try to go solve crimes, and have to deal with people who are doing horrible things.
Right.
So, the idea was that there should be some solace.
Yeah.
There has to be a place you could go to where you could just let that go.
Yeah.
And for Trevor, in the first book, it doesn't really exist. He has his father. That's really it. And he has these other relationships that aren't necessarily healthy and kind of toxic. And he makes a decision that he wants to build something, a safe haven, a place where he can go. And he wants to have a family.
Right.
And I think that, it's hard for detectives and police officers, especially in fiction, to show that. Oftentimes it's tropes. It's either an element of family, but it's sometimes dysfunctional. There could be ex-wife or ex-spouse or husband or something. But I didn't want Trevor to have to contend with that. I actually wanted it to be a very safe place for him.
Right.
And I think that that's what makes him an effective detective, because he does have that place to go to where he gets replenished. And he will never forget the importance of empathy and sympathy in fighting for victims. There's a lot of novels approach that, but you don't always see it on the page. Well, your character will say that, but we don't always see that manifest on the page with the character's interactions.
Yeah.
So it was important for me to show that Trevor has that, and that he's a human being. He goes home, he has to wash dishes, take out trash, even though he's saved 10 people or something.
Right.
At the end of the day, he's just a dude.
And I think including something like family kind of illustrates the stakes that I think in general detectives and investigators have to work with. I think when you explain things like the home that you're going home to, it kind of not only does it show that there is a safe space for people that need it after working so long and trying to, give justice to society, but it also shows the guilt. It also shows the resentment for choosing that life. There was a documentary on Netflix. I always talk about it because I think it really did a great job at illustrating just how scary the situation was. But the Night Stalker documentary on Richard Ramirez, the thing that really got me, it was never about the descriptions of the serial killer. It was the descriptions of the investigators talking to their wives about how they need to lock the doors, they need to keep the kids in one room, always carry a weapon on you. And that's not something you really hear, because when you kind of get documentaries about true crime, it's always about what happened next. We got to keep on going. What are we doing right now? How does this immediately affect the case? But I liked the way that documentary was made because it kind of shows the side effects of having a killer on the loose. There's nothing peaceful about investigating something. And yeah, you might get, fame for being the one that solves the case, but at what cost? You're the one that's staying up all night. You're the one that's talking to family. You're saying goodnight every night, but you don't know if you get into an altercation with someone, that could be your last time saying goodnight. That could be your last time seeing your children. If you're over there hunting for somebody that's known to kill, and sometimes you have to go home and tell your family, like, hey, it's okay, even though you don't know if it really is going to be okay. I think Trevor being able to understand that line and constantly trying to make an effort for family, it kind of, again, makes him more of a three-dimensional character. So I think you did a great job with that. I think it's great. Of course. Moving on to another factor of your writing, it's clear that your fiction explores themes of, again, race, justice, identity, and redemption. There's a section where Trevor talks about a cruel reality of America, using his experience as a LAPD detective to share his perspective on Black Americans being forgotten when they're victims of crime. This paints a bleak picture of society, leading to Trevor carrying a sense of hatred towards those that don't acknowledge this. But after 2 chapters of Trevor saying this, we have him praying with one of these victims of crime, sharing that she hopes that Trevor is, and I quote, delivered from his anger and has brought peace and joy in his heart so he may one day know forgiveness, and asks that justice is brought to all of us who have suffered at the hands of wickedness. Can you elaborate more on this juxtaposition?
Yeah, I mean, Trevor has, in the very first book, he has a crisis of faith. So he is trying to figure out who he really is. And then part of that is trying to determine, I guess, his spiritual interior, where he puts all these things, right? And for a long time, he hid them behind anger. And I put it in the first book, it was encouraged. I mean, when I was in the police academy, it was encouraged. Like, anger is like a tool. Right. So we were always mad because either you got in trouble by your DI would make you do push-ups because one person did something wrong, and then you would be mad at that person. And, they cultivated this environment of, anger, because the idea is if you're angry and you're having to, contend with something on the street, you're going to be sharper. But I always felt like it made no sense to me because law enforcement is more centered on almost being a social worker because you're dealing with people at their worst. And I think if there was a level of empathy, a lot of the things that we see in the news probably wouldn't happen if within the training space, it was cultivated that empathy comes first before the aggression and the anger. And so Trevor is having to contend with that. You can't take that anger home. People do, but it's detrimental. Right. But the idea is that, he recognizes early on, this is not the person that I want to be. And if I don't do something, then this is going to probably consume me and I'll end up like my father. Right. So when he's with the victim who got away in the church, he sees, he marvels at it. It makes no sense to him in the beginning that she was able to get away from these horrible people who are doing these terrible things, and that she's okay. Like, he can't fathom it. Right. Because he looks at her like, but you were trapped and these people had you, and then somehow you got away, but then your brother didn't. And for him, he's like, how does that anger not completely consume you? How are you even able to be in this church singing in the choir, and still be happy and find joy? And so that's why she essentially tells him, is that it's something that I had to work at. It wasn't just something that happened. She had to find that. She had to find who she was again. And she tells this to Trevor with the idea that at some point he will have the same peace that she does. She looks at him, people who suffer trauma can recognize trauma in other people very easily. And so she saw it immediately when she looked at him and was able to see that he had gone through horrible things. And that is ultimately why she prays for him in that moment because it worked for her, and the hope is that maybe that will work for him.
Right. I think it's an interesting point because not only are detectives and investigators supposed to carry the baggage of solving crime, but like you were saying, you know, they're kind of trained with the sense of anger, but they're also looked down on when you go towards routes like therapy, where it's one of those things where if you're going to experience the anger, that's part of the job, and you know, good luck with trying to hold it all in because.
Well, that's it. And if police officers go seek therapy, it often shows up in their background. So it's always frowned upon for them to do that, even if they go to the department psychiatrist or psychologist. That's frowned upon. So oftentimes it's only if you're required to go, but it's always there, and it's always an open door where they could go if they decide to.
Right.
But most officers won't do that.
Yeah, maybe it's like a little bit of a internal culture thing where, you know, the idea of going to somebody else for your problems, it's very unlike someone that is supposed to be the person that others go to say, hey, I need help.
Very much so.
And I think that chapter is also really interesting because I completely understood Trevor in that situation, if I'm being honest. You know, you read about some of the crimes that's out there in the world and you see how some specific communities are being affected more than others. And there is a deep sense of anger that comes with that, frustration where you're wondering, you know, why aren't people being treated equally, especially in a country where we essentially market the idea of equality. And, you know, when you see the person in the church that escaped the crime, I was thinking that she was going to be just as mad as Trevor. So I was like, okay, these two are going to work together. But it was the other way around where she kind of said, I found my peace. And I still questioned it. I thought it was fake. I thought she was just saying that for the sake of saying it.
Yeah.
But when they prayed together and Trevor kind of sheds that tear in the middle of that prayer, it was kind of like, you know, an unconscious reality or like a decision to understand that, yeah, she's not faking it. And I think that's why Trevor kind of shed that tears because she got something that he has yet to kind of achieve. He's not really there yet. And he's constantly choosing, you know, to stay back because he's not ready to give up this life of wanting to solve crime and helping those that need justice. And there's a cost with that as well, right? Like we talked about family earlier, but it's also a sense of peace. And I thought that was a really interesting, you know, a really interesting snippet of the book. And later on in the book, you know, we start seeing more plot points. We start seeing, you know, the person getting covered for their crime. We see a lot more violence. And, you know, leading to the last question, at the end of this novel, Trevor says, we have choices in this world, life or death, build or destroy, love or hate. And while I'm choosing love, some people will steadfastly cling to hate. And for them, I have no words, only endless pity. You know, after talking about the previous question and seeing how much Trevor is trying to fight for this sense of peace, why did you choose to end the novel with this line?
Because I think it encapsulates where Trevor is at the end of that story. So, and not just that story, I mean, it encapsulates how he feels adding up for the first book, the second book, and then ultimately the Bluest Night. He has seen how detrimental and horrible it is when people decide to live with malice and with hate, and that becomes part of their identity. And so for him, that's all he has is endless pity for those people because realistically, he knows those people are not going to change. Like there's another part where he's talking to Sheriff Cohen, and Sheriff Cohen is saying, I think you would really like living here, you know, in Malibu. It's like a paradise. And Trevor says, there is no paradise. As long as people are hurting other people and harming each other, there is no place that you can go where you can call that a paradise. It's only a facade. The notion that a community is quote unquote so safe that you don't have to lock your doors, that's not real.
Right.
It's just that people create that because they want to feel that so desperately. But as long as human beings are operating in the way that they do, Trevor knows it's no different when it comes to these communities. There's always, within these communities, it's always going to be people who are harming people. The only difference is that in this story, in Malibu, it's not investigated, it's not reported. People are missing and people just have a wall. The sheriff department just has a wall. These people were missing, but there's no follow through to even go out and seek what happened to those people. So, you know, when Trevor has that epiphany, if you will, And I start out that passage by saying, you know, he finally kind of understands what the victim was telling him in the church, you know, and so that notion that even through all of this, he's been thinking about it, but it finally hits him, and he starts to get a sense of what she was saying, and that helps him formulate this notion, which is very much the bullet point, you know, the period at the end of the sentence in terms of the book, right. Which is you have to actively try to make your life better and the people around you if you truly are a humanist. And so Trevor is becoming more of a humanist in the sense that he recognizes that there's a level of equality that exists just because you're human. And it doesn't matter where you come from. It doesn't matter your station in life, your status. It doesn't matter any of those things. Because at the end of the day, he just sees people as people. Like there's a level there that's just basic. And he recognizes that not everyone's gonna have that mentality. Right. And a lot of people don't. I mean, he encounters a lot of them in this particular story. And so that endless pity is just that. It is a bottomless hole of pity for those people who are never going to be able to climb out of it because of the choices that they make and how they choose to see the world and how they choose to see their fellow man.
Yeah. I think that's why Trevor's such an interesting character to me personally. I think, you know, when you read the novel in the beginning, you can tell he's a pessimist. Doesn't believe in people at all because he's seen the reality of things, right? He's seen the dark side of society. He sees the things that people try to hide. He's seen the things that people are trying to forget about just to have this fake sense of like peace and to say, you know, what Detective Cohen was saying, like, oh, we're in Malibu. It's such a peaceful place. Well, it's peaceful, but at the cost of whose turmoil, right? It's at the cost of somebody else's sadness. And, you know, you see Trevor dealing with that. And I could totally see him taking a different route where he solves this case. He also sees everything around him and he comes out saying, you know what, screw everything. This is just, you know, this is ugly. The world's an ugly place and people don't think the way that I do, so why even try? And it's really easy to give up in moments like that. The thing that I really liked about how this book ended is because I think for those that choose to take the path of wanting to actively work on themselves and take the path of seeing the best in people, even though you're in a room of those that don't really see the best in you or they probably think of other things of other people, it's an internal perspective. Yeah. And if you can change yourself to at least see more bright things that are in your path and in your future, it allows you to kind of subconsciously affect other people's future as well, where you're not looking at other people with a dark lens, where you're like, this person is flawed, I don't want to deal with them, they're a mess. Instead, it's, you know, I have pity, because you have a lot of trauma, I see it in you, and I could see that you're trying to work on it. And even though, you know, your methods of working on it are questionable, and I know it's probably not gaining the best results, the second you give up on that journey of wanting to try is honestly the ultimate, you know, failure you can give to yourself, where you don't really allow yourself that opportunity to be better for not only your circle, but for anybody else, especially as a detective and an investigator. So, you know, I think that's such a great takeaway, and I think this book serves as a great lesson for anybody that's going through a really rough time. You know, you can't just let one moment control the rest of your life. Yeah. Even though it gets really rough and it gets really scary at times, you have to keep on going because you never know who can benefit from the hope that you give to the world.
And people need, I mean, Trevor's becoming a hero. People need heroes, yeah, like in their life. So, right, you know, whether it's a family member, you know, Trevor thought that his father is in some ways is a little bit of a hero to him. Mm-hmm. He's incredibly problematic, but he's working on himself. Right. And we really see that in the second book, and that carries over to this book where he's already in treatment for his alcohol addiction, and he's actively trying to be a better father because he was not that for Trevor when he was young. Right. And so the people within Trevor's orbit, whether or not he recognizes it or not, are very much inspired by the sacrifices he's willing to make to make the world better and right, help people who otherwise are not getting help and are not getting justice. Yeah. And so, you know, he becomes this almost, he's a lightning rod for a lot of drama, that's for sure, and chaos. But he also is a beacon for people. Yeah. And, you know, as he emerges and he establishes himself as a hero, especially in this last book that I'm writing, mm-hmm, I think people will will be able to walk away and say, I got to see someone who lost faith, who had a very cynical outlook, in terms of how they saw the world, and they were able to change. And so hopefully, for people who read all the books, they'll be able to get a sense of that. And I think, that's how I know Trevor is fine to set him aside, because he would have completed his character arc and his growth.
Absolutely.
Which is what I set out to do. He was never supposed to be a 15-book character. He was supposed to be, 3 or 4.
Yeah.
And that was going to be it.
Yeah, no, and just, concluding on that point, I think at the end of the book, Trevor's father sees a hero in his son.
Yeah.
Especially as someone that, Trevor's father, he's not blind to the stuff that he's done. He knows that he messed up.
Oh, yeah.
He has incredible problems with drinking. He's trying to get better. He relapses. He goes back to rehab. Then there's, the idea that, like, he knows he messed up by not being able to be there for his family. And I think
having a secret family.
Right, and then having a secret family.
Having a whole other,
yeah, that's
that he tried to keep hidden,
right.
And ultimately that comes, to the surface when Trevor's long lost brother is missing.
Right.
But if that didn't happen,
yeah,
it's a good chance that his father never would have. Those are things people find out, when people die.
Yeah.
That there's a whole other secret family. People show up to the funeral, from other, and say, who are you? I'm your brother. That's the kind of thing.
No, you're not.
So that's
go back
like,
home.
well, who are you?
Yeah, right.
And so that's probably what would have happened had it not been for for Avery going missing with his girlfriend. And so it forced that to come to the surface, and in a way it saves his father.
Yeah.
Because his father now has to contend with, that was kind of the last thing. His father did a lot of stuff, but that was kind of the last, I would say, smack to Trevor's psyche.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And so that would have been something he probably would have had to deal with way down the line. But his father is unburdened by it because now it's out. And since it's out, they can actually deal with it. And they deal with it through the course of the investigation. So the investigation is a healing opportunity for Sean, his father, and Trevor.
Right.
It's a buddy cop book, a little bit, but it's also, they have these conversations that ordinarily they would never have had. His father would have just, put it aside, ignored it, changed the subject, but you can't.
Right.
In this situation, and they're stuck in a car together for most of the book. So they're forced to have those conversations.
Yeah, I think it's beautiful to know that, ugly stories can create magnificent endings and beautiful results if you just give it time.
Oh, yeah.
So, No, I'm very excited to see what Trevor goes through in the final book. I think The Bluest Night was an amazing novel.
Thank you.
And I want to thank you again for sitting down with me to have this interview. It's amazing.
Thank you.
I hopefully we don't go to any funerals and we end up finding out we got long lost families or something.
I hope not. But it's real. It happens,
Right,
so,
right. But no, thank you again. This is amazing, Aaron. And I'll open it up to a general Q&A to the audience. And then from there, we'll do a book signing event.
Yes.
I had a question for your process as an author. You mentioned when you're making Trevor do something, sometimes he does things that you wouldn't want him to do. So as an author, as the person who ultimately controls the story, how do you stop him from necessarily going a route that would make him too perfect, if that makes sense?
Well, I normally will go with it for a little bit and see where it ends up. I don't know. I don't think Trevor will ever be too perfect, but he will make a certain decision sometimes that I'll say, I wonder where that came from. Like, why is he doing that? And then I'll go with it for maybe a chapter and then see where it ends up. And then sometimes if I think it's not headed in the right direction, then I'll stop and I'll outline, and then I'll give him another path just to see, how that kind of goes. But I just let the subconscious deal with it. You know what I mean? It's a level of freedom. Like, I outline very loosely because it's a blueprint, and I know it's probably going to change. And so I'm okay with that. I allow it to change, and it becomes more organic that way. But I try not to, I know some people who outline the whole book and they just go exactly what's on their outline, they write. But to me, there's no discovery in that. You got to have some room there to see what might happen and what might change.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
So a lot of people ask, what's your favorite part about writing the book? But I just want to know, what's your least favorite part about writing this book?
Deadlines. So if I had the freedom and I wasn't on deadlines, it would be a whole different experience. But this book ended up getting, the majority of this book was written at a art retreat in Ojai over the course of 4 days. So where I had to do it, because I was kind of writing at my leisure, and then I realized it's actually due in 3 weeks. So I had to kind of get it together. But yeah, deadlines are rough. So, but other than that, I mean, this story, it was easy to write because I've lived with Trevor since 2020. So, I know how he thinks and I know how he operates. So I think, it's easy to sit down and get back into the groove of the characters and everything. Yes.
So you said that this series will be span about 3 or 4 books. After this, what is your plan? Do you think you would like to stay in this genre, or span to a different?
Well, yeah. I mean, I'll stay in the genre, but I probably won't write another detective story for a little while. So the next book that's coming out, so the 4th Trevor Finnegan book will come out, but then also I wrote what could be the start of a new series, but is written as a standalone, but it is a psychological thriller. And so the best way to describe it is it's talented Mr. Ripley set in the world of hip hop. And so, and this is before all the Diddy stuff. But I have friends who work in the music industry, and they tell me all kind of stories. So I have been kind of formulating the story for a long time, but I wanted to tell the story of kind of a Ripley-esque character who's incredibly smart and ultimately takes, kind of steals someone's life and becomes successful in the process. And then that person ultimately is going to come back and want their life back. So it's a little bit of dueling sociopaths in this book. But that book will be out, I believe, in 2027, and it's called All the Smoke. And then I have an idea for the follow-up to that as well. But that was a really fun book to write. So hopefully that will become a series. Yes.
I'm sure that you love, writing this book and everything, but how do you feel about maybe getting towards the end of it? Are you sad that it's finishing, or are you happy that you've gone through this journey now? 3 books, the 4th one, like you said, is coming. How does that kind of feel for you that you've gone to this point now? Sometimes when you get to the end, you're like, I don't know, but it feels great that you built something up that you really enjoyed.
It's cathartic.
Yeah.
When I get to the end and I'm able to type those words, the end, I normally will not do anything for about 2 weeks. And just detox the whole story, because this is noir. I mean, this is crime fiction, so we're dealing with dark themes and subject matter, and most of the time I'll take a break and maybe just read something lighthearted or work on something that's a little more fun, And I think that's why it's only going to be 4 books, because it does take a lot out of you. It's kind of like actors who say they'll play a character for 6 months, then after that, it's hard to detox that character. And so the same thing for some of these stories, I spend a lot of time researching and understanding Trevor's psychology. And so I'm living, in his head for a lot of that. And so I think I have to kind of set that aside. Colson Whitehead, he writes a lot about trauma. And he said for about a month after he finishes a book, he just plays video games with his kids. So he doesn't do anything else except listen to music and play video games. And that allows him to kind of detox that a little bit. Yes, the young lady in the back.
I have a question. So, how did you balance writing Worse Than a Lie, The Bluest Night, and The Accomplice like all together, not mixing up the stories because you wrote them like almost at the same time?
Yeah, I wouldn't do that again. So yeah, I was writing 3 books at one time. That was. Thank you, sweetheart, for reminding me of that. You know, it's that just happened that way. But I literally was existing or had these characters existing in my head, multiple characters. So, Worse Than a Lie is a book I worked on with civil rights attorney Benjamin Crump. It's his first novel. And so I was writing that, I was writing The Bluest Night, and I also was writing the hip hop thriller that I'm doing. And so all those characters are incredibly different. And so for me, I had a playlist for each character. And I would have to listen to that playlist to get into the mood and the vibe of that character. And so for Worse Than a Lie, it was a lot of jazz. And then for Trevor, he's a 90s kid, so it's a lot of throwback, like classic 90s hip hop and alternative and Nirvana and Pearl Jam, or, you know, that's the whole Trevor Finnegan playlist. And then for the hip hop thriller, I was listening to a lot of Nas and Tupac and Biggie and Lupe Fiasco, a lot of just very highly lyrical rappers on that playlist. And I would do that, I would listen to it, and then I would remember what I wanted to write about. I remember what I wanted to say with those books, and they would get me kind of in that zone. But no, yeah, it was incredible, difficult process. I would not recommend that for anybody because that year, I don't even think I really slept. I would write from 9 to about 2 in the morning, and then get up at 6:35. And I did that religiously, so.
All right, I think that's the Q&A.
All right. Thank you. Just want to thank everybody for coming out. This has been beautiful. So thank you for your support. And I have some books, the copies of The Bluest Night. I'm happy to sign them for you. So if you're interested, you can pop over to the signing station here in the corner, and then also highly encourage you to get some popcorn chicken. Okay.
Thank you so much to Nathan. If we give a big round of applause for Nathan and conducting this interview. And I also want to say, of course, thank you to Aaron Phillip Clark and Hop Cafe. Solomon, thank you so much for doing this. Okay.
Hi, I'm Aaron Phillip Clark, and I wrote the Trevor Finnegan novel, The Bluest Night. I am partnered here with BookBase, and you should definitely go and check them out. It's a wonderful app that builds community around books.